Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 132nd Commencement Exercises of the United States Coast Guard Academy. I am Captain Eric Jones, the Assistant Superintendent here at the Academy. I ask that the audience rise and remain standing for the arrival of the official party, the rendering of honors, the national anthem, and our invocation. Military personnel, attend hut. The Superintendent of the United States Coast Guard Academy, Rear Admiral Sandra L. Stows. The Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, Master Chief Michael P. Levitt. The Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, Admiral Robert J. Papp, Jr. Military personnel, hand salute. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden. Ready? 2. Military personnel at ease.
The 132nd commencement exercises of the United States Coast Guard Academy are now convened.
Military members in the platform party, please remain covered until the conclusion of the invocation. All other military personnel, with the exception of the graduating class and presenters of commissions, please remain covered throughout the ceremony. The Command Chaplain of the Coast Guard Academy, Captain Brian Finch, will now deliver the invocation.
Let us pray. O God, on this festive occasion, we pause to celebrate and give thanks for the United States Coast Guard Academy Class of 2013, who have selflessly chosen to serve our nation and the cause of freedom. While they come from diverse backgrounds and bring with them a wide variety of life experiences, they share one thing in common: the desire to serve and make a difference in the world. They are the future leaders of our Coast Guard and our nation, and as such represent the very best our nation has to offer. We give thanks for their commitment and courageous determination over these past 4 years, and we pray that you, O God, will bless their journey and continue to train them up as selfless men and women of integrity. We thank you for that so much, Lord, and we thank you for these men and women of our Coast Guard today who dedicate each day to the preservation of our freedom. May your grace and mercy continue to empower these young leaders as they move to take their place among the rich traditions they will inherit. Grant them your wisdom and guidance from above. We commend the interest of our dearest country to the protection of your almighty hand, especially on this day of great celebration and achievement. For it is in your holy and rich name this day we pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Platform party and presenters of commissions, please uncover. I now have the pleasure of introducing the 40th Superintendent of the United States Coast Guard Academy, Rear Admiral Sandra L. Stows.
Good morning and welcome to the Coast Guard Academy. This is an incredibly exciting day for the Coast Guard Academy as we have the privilege of welcoming our Commandant, Admiral Papp, and Vice President Biden, who will serve as our 132nd commencement speaker. Welcome to our distinguished guests, who include many active duty and retired military members: Rear Admiral Cook, Rear Admiral Metrick, Rear Admiral Perry, Vice Admiral Breckenridge, Rear Admiral Espinoza, Major General Leclerc, along with Assistant Secretary Smith from DHS, and the local officials, including Governor Malloy and Mayor Finizio. And a warm welcome to all of our distinguished guests. Here at the Academy, we take great pride in being locally relevant and nationally prominent, and today is the best of both. Well, it's a great day for commencement, and doesn't this Academy and graduation set look just superb? This is National Public Works Week, and the theme this year is Because of Public Works. I want to thank the 63 men and women in our Coast Guard Academy Public Works Department for their dedication and devotion in preparing the Academy and setting up for this event. This is all made possible today because of Public Works. Thank you, Public Works. Finally, today is all about the parents, families, and their cadets. This is the class of 2013's big day, and we are all here to support them and celebrate with them as they commission and prepare to get underway for their first assignments on board cutters, at flight school, and at sectors. All of us who have been cadets know that it is the support of our family and friends that sustained us through our journey here. And I thank all of you in the audience, the parents, the families, and the friends who have done so much to motivate and sustain our cadets. The class of 2013 includes 4 international cadets who have greatly enriched our academy during their time with us. I now invite these international graduating cadets, along with the members of their national delegation, to stand and be recognized when their name is called. These graduates will return to their countries to serve with distinction. From Belize, Alma Marcela Pinello. From Honduras, Felipe Martinez. With Admiral Espinoza. From Lithuania, Nerijus Šarkauskas. From Tunisia, Hisham Rihuma. And congratulations to all of the graduates of the great class of 2013. The class of 2013 is comprised of many exceptional young men and women who have learned that they are only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. They have forged the bonds of trust that enabled them to develop into individual leaders of character and to form the cohesive team presented here today. I now have the privilege of introducing one member of this exceptional group who has earned special recognition as this year's distinguished graduate. The distinguished graduate is the cadet who graduates with the highest military precedence average, which includes the academic, military, and physical components of the entire 200-week program. It is with great pride that I introduce this year's distinguished graduate, Cadet Joseph Sullivan Springhetti. And I get to say a little bit about Joe first. First class Sullivan Springhetti is from Beaverton, Oregon. A government major, he focused his studies on international affairs, philosophy, Spanish, and law. Cadet Sullivan Springhetti played on the men's tennis team all 4 years. He served as editor of the Academy's literary magazine, Id Est, president of the Diversity Peer Educators, president of Alpha Lambda Delta Honor Society, vice president of the Society for Policy and International Affairs, and co-captain of the Bears mock trial team, a real underachiever. On top of all that, he is led at several levels within the cadet regiment, including company guidon, company commander, and culminating as regimental commander for the Corps of Cadets this spring. Next month, Cadet Sullivan Springhetti reports to the Coast Guard cutter Venturous in St. Peters, Florida, as a deck watch officer. Ladies and gentlemen, Cadet First Class Joseph Sullivan Springhetti.
Vice President Biden, Admiral Papp, Admiral Stowe, Master Chief Leavitt, distinguished guests, faculty and staff, family, friends, and the great Academy class of 2013. Good morning. This past Thanksgiving, I was back home in Beaverton, and I was doing some recruiting at my old alma mater, Beaverton High School, home of Bucky, the Beaverton Beaver. And I was, of course, presenting on the Academy. And I had just gotten through my PowerPoint and asked if there were any questions. And this kid in the back raised his hand and said, so you said the Academy's free, right? And I said, technically. And he said, okay, so the academy's free, but then the catch is you have to be in the Coast Guard afterwards, right? And I didn't quite know what to say to that because of all the misconceptions that people have about this place. I think that is one of the most profound. That somehow service in the Coast Guard is a negative or an obligation, and that coming to the academy is itself the reward. And what came to me as I stood there in that College and Career Center is something that I think everyone in this stadium intuitively knows. And that is that the academy is a wonderful, beautiful place. But it is not what I would call a reward. The academy is 4 years of essays and exams, marching tours and drill, late nights in the power lab, early mornings on the parade field, 4 years of sales stations and pepper spray and pressure point demonstrations with Coach Grant. It's 4 years of hard work. And it's not that the academy is the reward and the Coast Guard the obligation. It's the opposite. We come to New London. We persevere through the frustrations and deprivations and stress. We come to the Coast Guard Academy so that one day, today, we can stand on this field and join the ranks of the world's best Coast Guard. And to me, that is what today is about. The transition from the academy to the fleet, from school to work, from obligation to reward. I want to recognize everything we've done here for the past 4 years. But to my mind, this ceremony isn't about yesterday. It's not about what we've done or how far we've come, but rather what we will do, how far we will go. Today is a celebration of our potential, of our futures, and those futures deserve to be celebrated. Because when I look out at this field, when I look out at us, I see 200 plus cadets who could go anywhere they want. Jess Ward could be a Nobel laureate. Nick Polar could be an astronaut. Jimmy Knudsen could be the commandant. Each of us has that potential. Every single one of us has the education, has the tenacity and work ethic and skill. Every single one of us could go wherever we want. Our prospects are blinding. Our possibilities are boundless. But what makes us different isn't just that we have potential. The people graduating up in Cambridge this week have potential. The people down in New Haven, too. What makes us different is that you and I have promised our potential. We have pledged it, not to ourselves, not to a corporation or to a bottom line, but to our country and humanity. What makes us different is that 4 years ago, you and I stood and took an oath, made a vow to use our strengths and attributes, our courage, our dedication, our lives in service to others, to making our country safer and stronger and more prosperous, to be the line in the sand, the port in the storm. And that is a beautiful thing. It's going to be very challenging as well. Service demands sacrifice. And we know that. It's our class's motto, inscribed on our rings and written on our backs: sacrifice to serve. Our careers will demand that sacrifice, and it will never be easy. But you know what? We're going to make it. We're going to be just fine because you and I will never be alone. Our families, sitting behind us, have been there for us for the past 4 years, and they will always be there for us for the next 5 and 20 and 30 years. Sources of compassion and kindness, support and love. They will always be behind us, just as they are today. No matter how much our work may ask of us, no matter how fraught with challenges our paths may grow. Mom, Dad, and Rose, to all the moms and dads, siblings and grandparents and relatives, to the friends and fiancés, the faculty and staff too, thank you. Thank you for what you have done. Thank you for what we know you will always do for us. Today belongs to you as well. But that's not all. Because just as important as the family sitting in the stands behind us is the family sitting on the field with us, to our left and right. Because we don't graduate today as classmates or as fellow alumni, but as shipmates, as brothers and sisters in the long blue line. And yes, the class Facebook page might blow up every once in a while. That doesn't mean we're not still 2013. It doesn't mean we're not still one. We will always support one another, rely on one another, laugh and cry with each other, marry each other in some cases. The bonds that have formed between us over the past 4 years, those bonds will not break. They will never yield. You all are the closest friends I've ever known, and I am humbled to stand with you today. So where do we stand? Well, just a few speeches away from being officers, just a few minutes away from the next 5 years of our lives. And those 5 years will be incredible. We will interdict drugs, stop pollution, tend buoys and break ice, train foreign navies, and save lives. We will serve our country as Renaissance officers, and our work will matter. This is our reward, that here today you and I stand on the brink, on the cusp of the greatest adventure of our lives. And so my only real message today, the last thing I want to say, is go. We've worked for it, prepared for it, dreamt of it, trained for it, and today we have earned it. So go. Go protect, go guard, go patrol and shield, go interdict and seize, go search and rescue, go sacrifice and go save. Go commencement, go 2013, and go Bears. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan Springhetti. It is now my privilege to introduce the Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, Admiral Robert J. Papp, Jr. Admiral Papp graduated from the Coast Guard Academy in 1975. He is a native of Norwich, Connecticut, and a graduate of Norwich Free Academy. Admiral Papp is the 24th Commandant of the United States Coast Guard and the 13th Gold Ancient Mariner. He has served in 6 cutters and commanded 4, including America's tall ship, the Coast Guard's training bark Eagle. As a flag officer, He has served as Commander, Coast Guard Atlantic Area, the Coast Guard's Chief of Staff, Commander of the 9th District, and the Director of Reserve and Training. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Admiral Papp.
Well, Cadet Sullivan Springatti was up here, and I think my job is done. He gets it. And I don't know, Miss Knudsen, where are you? Yeah, there may be a vacancy in another year or so, so I would suggest you get your resume together. Okay, thank you. Mr. Knudsen. And to all of you, I'm just sitting here thinking, actually one of the state troopers who was here this morning, I passed on a picture to one of my agents that's with me. And it was a picture of me and my father from 38 years ago on the same field. So 38 years from now, very likely one of you will be up here, and I hope you are, because this is a great class, and you have certainly learned the lessons of the Academy, and it will be our pleasure very shortly here to welcome you into our Coast Guard. Vice President Biden, Governor Malloy, Rear Admiral Stowes, Master Chief Leavitt, all the family and friends and supporters of the Coast Guard, and to the class of 2013. Good morning, shipmates. I want to welcome all the visitors, those who came out from out of town, to New London. Did I get that right, Mayor Finizio? Mayor Finizio has lamented the fact that at the other academies they refer themselves as West Point or Colorado Springs or Kings Point or Annapolis, and he's wondered why we don't refer to this place as New London. So I say this morning, welcome to New London. New London, the home of the United States Coast Guard Academy and the future home of the National Coast Guard Museum. And I want to thank Governor Malloy and Mayor Finizio personally and publicly for the outstanding support and work behind the scenes that they have done over the last year or so to bring us giant steps closer to the reality of having our first National Museum for the United States Coast Guard here in New London, Connecticut. So thanks to the both of you. I know you've done a lot of work behind the scenes, and we're deeply appreciative. There's one other person I want to thank this morning. It was Chaplain Finch who gave our invocation this morning. This will be his last graduation at the Academy, probably his last ceremony while serving within the Coast Guard, because he'll be retiring after 30 years of service in the United States Navy and multiple tours in the United States Coast Guard. So I want to thank him for his service to our country, his service to the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard Academy, and wish him well as he goes into retirement. Now, Secretary Napolitano was supposed to do the duties that I'm going to do momentarily, but as you know, the people of Oklahoma were hit very hard this week. Our hearts and our prayers go out to all the people of Oklahoma during this very terrible tragedy. It's one more reminder that nature can be fair, but nature can be foul. And as sailors, we never have control over the weather. All we can do is react to it and adapt to it. And all of you will be confronting from time to time stormy and uncertain seas. And I know that your preparation here has made you ready for that. And we'll continue to think of our fellow countrymen in Oklahoma as we celebrate your accomplishments today. But Secretary Napolitano was to be here to do what I now have the distinct honor of doing, and that's to introduce the 47th Vice President of the United States as your commencement speaker. Vice President Biden is a champion for our nation's military and a distinguished leader for national defense. As a senator, he strengthened our nation's counter-narcotics efforts, a mission that we know very well. And as Vice President, he's made it a priority not only to support our nation's active duty members, but also our military veterans and their families as well. Now, the Vice President and I share a characteristic. We both married well, and we married very devoted and smart women, and both those women have a passion for taking care of our military families. His wife, Dr. Jill Biden, has also been an ardent supporter of our military families. In addition to being Blue Star parents, the Vice President and Dr. Biden have both worked tirelessly to bring attention to the sacrifices of military families. Through her Joining Forces initiative with our First Lady, Michelle Obama, Dr. Biden has challenged all Americans to find ways to support and engage our military families in their own communities, and provided tremendous support to our own Coast Guard Family Campaign. When they speak to military families, they speak from the perspective of being a military family. And I've seen them up close and personal in Washington, D.C., and I know when they speak from the heart. The Coast Guard is grateful for the continued leadership of the Vice President. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the 47th Vice President of the United States and your commencement speaker, Vice President Joe Biden.
Thank you very much, Admiral. Thank you very, very much. Please be seated. Thank you so very, very much. Let me say, Admiral, before I begin, that echo your words, that our hearts go out and our prayers are said for the people of Oklahoma, particularly Moore, Oklahoma. Secretary Napolitano, as the Commandant has said, was scheduled to be here today. I met with her yesterday in the Situation Room relative to the situation in Oklahoma. And she asked me to extend her apologies. But Secretary Napolitano is doing her job. She's in Moore, Oklahoma, leading FEMA and the first responders through that region, doing everything in her power to assist the brave citizens of Oklahoma. They weathered the worst that nature has to offer, and they responded with the best that humanity has to offer, and with a remarkable courage that leads a person to put the safety of others ahead of their own. As the rescue continues and the building begins, we have made clear to Governor Fallin and Mayor Lewis that they have all the resources they need at their disposal. And no one knows better than my friend, your governor, how in times of tragedy and difficulty, the good wishes and the help of the rest of the nation matter. And Mr. Mayor, Governor, I want to say again to you publicly, the way you handle the tragedy at Sandy Hook has been a model of remarkable. Your stamina and your compassion were able to be seen by not only your fellow citizens, but the whole world. And so the governor knows what it's like to go through such travail. A long road lies ahead of the people of Moore, and it's not going to be easy, but they'll not travel alone. They'll have all the resources of the United States government and the United States military and the American people at their side as they make their way through. Rear Admiral Stowes, Governor O'Malley, Mr. Mayor, I think it's a good idea, to change the name here. I mean, in London. And Admiral Espinoza of the Honduran Navy, shipmates, cadets, parents, friends. It's an honor to be here today to share this day with you, and I mean it. If you're like most graduating classes, including mine, you're not likely to remember who your commencement speaker was. But I assure you, you'll remember this day the rest of your lives. And I'm honored that you allowed me to share this day with you. I also want you to know, Admiral, that I'm proud to say that I'm accompanied by 3 Coast Guard graduates who work for me. The commander who is running my operation, national security, my military aide, is a graduate. A National Security Council, Lieutenant Commander Ann O'Connell, White House fellow Lieutenant Steve Nutting, Executive Officer of the Situation Room in the White House, and Lieutenant Commander Pat Lasik, my military aide, and Captain Patty Hill, Coast Guard fellow working with me. I didn't have any trouble asking them if they wanted to board the plane to come to London. They were on long before I was there. And we're all of us honored to be here. And to all the parents here today, on behalf of the President of the United States of America and myself, let me say thank you for raising sons and daughters as formidable, talented, and patriotic as the young men and women who sit before me today. Your country, and I mean this sincerely to all the parents, your country is indebted to you. And I'm absolutely certain that the graduates sitting before you, they turned out to be all you hoped they may become, men and women of courage and commitment. So parents, it's your day too. So graduating class of 2013, get off your seats and salute your parents. Up, and thank them. And I have a feeling we all may be saluting as our Commander-in-Chief, Sullivan Spaghetti, before this is over. You done good, boy. I'm just glad you're so damn young you can't take my job yet. You got to be 35 to qualify. Folks, in the early days of the Republic, Alexander Hamilton suggested, and I quote, that a few armed vessels judiciously stationed around the entrances of our ports might, at a small expense, be made useful sentinels of the laws. Well, all of you sitting before me today are about to become Hamilton sentinels, part, and this is not hyperbole, part of the greatest Coast Guard the world has ever seen. 294 young men and women with sound bodies, stout hearts, alert minds, with a liking for the sea and its lure, and with that high sense of honor, loyalty, and obedience, which goes with trained initiative and leadership. That is the Academy's mission, and that is what the Academy accomplished with all of you, the class of 2013. And great credit goes to the senior officers and professors who have brought you to this state. We owe all of you, all Americans, a debt of gratitude for training such an incredible group of young women and men. And you all deserve a round of applause as well. Class of 2013, this is not your father's Coast Guard. You are now an integral, indispensable part of the most capable armed forces in human history, and that is not hyperbole. You alone are entrusted with protecting 95,000 miles of U.S. shoreline, our coast, our rivers, our bays, our islands. And your mission extends even beyond that, from the Horn of Africa to East Asia, as the song says, from Aztec shores to Arctic zones. For most of you, 4 years ago, you were among the most promising high school graduates anywhere in America. Your future was limited only by your imaginations. And no one would have blamed you for choosing an easier road, one with greater physical security and more material gain. But that is not what you were made of. The old poem goes, the call of the running tide is a wild call and a clear call that may not be denied. Thank God you answered the call. You chose to answer that difficult but noble calling, to risk your lives in the service of your nation so that others may live. You survived as swabs. You got haircuts so severe your parents didn't recognize you. You read running light, squared corner, your corners, kept your eyes on the boat. 40 years from now, if someone wakes you from a deep sleep and asks you, how's the cow? You will not hesitate. You survived culminating events like the challenge of the Guardian, 100th week, and sea trials. You climbed masts nearly 150 feet high and more. You learned fellowship and leadership. It seemed like it would never happen, I expect, but you became cadre. You started teaching the new swabs. You spent your summers on missions far and wide. You paid your dues, and now you're about to become full-fledged commissioned officers in the nation's oldest continuing seagoing service, the United States Coast Guard. And on behalf of the Commander-in-Chief, your Commander-in-Chief and mine, let me say congratulations on a job well done. Class of 2013, you just didn't heed the call, you relished the challenge. On the playing fields, you excelled. You've been named All-American, All-Conference, All-New England. When not off on the international debating competitions, Holly earned the first-team All-American in softball. And more important, her team won 3 state NUMAC tournament championships. Now, while your quarterback, John Reich, was not leading in hours in the library, Johnny boy, I understand that. I played too. He was leading the Bears on the football field. As quarterback, he shattered every record. 4,569 passing yards, 4,883 yards of total offense, 38 touchdowns. When I asked the young man putting together my speech to put this in the speech, he asked, do you need the details? I said, obviously, you never played football. The details matter. And in the classroom, many of you excelled academically, and some of you, some of the major things you did not show up in your grade sheet. Designed new Arctic oil drilling vessels, invented collapsible rescue baskets for the H-65 helicopter, developed systems to clean up oil spills in inland waterways. And in this year's cyber defense exercise, the Coast Guard electrical engineers beat Navy. My son, who's a commissioned officer in the Navy, suggested I not say that. My son, who's an Iraqi veteran, a Marine, and a major in the Army, suggested, yes, I should. I tell you what, you guys are something else. And in the great tradition of this academy and all the academies, you still were able to find some time to cut loose a little bit. You set fire to picnic tables. You made your presence known at Hannafin's. I understand that's where half the football team spent their academic days. I'm only kidding, by the way. I don't know that for a fact. But I played college football, and that's where my team spent their time. I've learned from personal experience that, and I want you to listen closely to this, I've learned from personal experience, Admiral, that minor disciplinary infractions don't get in the way of talent. I guarantee you that's true. And it's with great relish, having been engaged in many minor infractions myself, and in keeping with the long-standing tradition, a tradition I truly wish they had at the University of Delaware when I graduated, I have now absolved you of all of those of you who committed minor infractions. That coming from a fellow who was on social probation for a while, I want to tell you I've looked forward to this for a long time. Look, I'm proud of all of you. You have sacrificed to serve your country, and it's just beginning, as your commencement speaker said. Serve your country in this great Coast Guard, from valedictorian to anchor cadet. Great distance, but let me tell you, before night falls, everyone on this field will be addressed as ma'am or sir, no matter where you graduated, regardless of your place in class. And all of you give meaning to the Coast Guard motto, Semper Paratus, always ready. Now I know, mottos are often used, and you use them so much they're taken for granted. But it really is how your fellow Americans think of you. Think about it. I really mean this. Think about it. The first thing they look to when they're in distress on the high seas, in the water, is the Coast Guard. Everything you do, from search and rescue to natural disasters, your shipmates have saved 3,650 lives last year alone, risking their lives. Risking their lives many times over to save others. And the interesting thing that's happened? We were a pretty good pass-receiver combination. A good friend of mine graduated from this academy, played for Otto Graham up here. His name was Bill Peterman, and he's still around. I talked to Bill before he's in California now. And the thing in our generation, we were appointed to the academies. I'm not sure everyone fully understood the demands and risks and talent required to do your job. But in the last decade or so, the Coast Guard has responded to 250,000 search and rescue cases, rescuing more than 50,000 people from certain peril. The risks are real, and sometimes the price of duty is very high. In the last 10 years, 25 Coast Guardsmen have given their lives in their line of duty. It was the Coast Guardsmen that went into 60-knot winds and 30-foot seas off the coast of North Carolina and rescued 14 of 16 crew members from the HMS Bounty during Hurricane Sandy. It was the Coast Guardsmen that arrived first in New Orleans after the Hurricane Katrina, rescued 33,000 women and men and children from the rooftops and from the city underwater. There are tens of thousands of grateful men and women and children from all parts of the world that will tell anyone who will listen that the most welcome sight they've ever seen in their life are those racing stripes coming toward them with the sound of that orange Coast Guard helicopter above them, lowering a bucket with a man or woman inside to save their lives. Without hesitation, Coast Guardsmen thrust themselves between drug traffickers and criminal gangs trying to reach our shores. Last year, you performed security boardings of 11,628 vessels. And being someone who is deeply involved in this issue, no matter how benign it looks, you never have any idea, once you step on board of that vessel, what awaits you. You've interdicted 163 tons of cocaine and marijuana, risking your lives on these missions, and in the case of Senior Chief Horn, giving his life off the coast of California when a smuggling vessel rammed into his small boat. I'm told the last act of Senior Chief Horn, as the smuggling vessel bore down on his own, was to reach toward the point of impact and push the coxswain aside to safety. That's courage and devotion in full measure in the greatest tradition of the United States Coast Guard. And finally, over the last decade or so, because of celebrated productions like The Perfect Storm, The Guardian, Coast Guard Alaska, and The Deepest and the Deadliest Catch, the American people have become aware of the incredible risk taken, talent required, and courage displayed in your search and rescue and interdiction missions. The American people are in awe of what you do. But what they don't know is that's only half of what you do. Today's Coast Guard is fully integrated into the global mission of the United States Armed Forces. Some on this campus might even say the Coast Guard is the hard nucleus about which the Navy forms in times of war. I did not say that. Some here would say that. But the real truth is, you work seamlessly with your sister services, and the whole of our military might, as a consequence, is greater than the sum of its parts. And your job is only getting more complicated. The Coast Guard's job, requiring greater capacity, greater talent. Because as the Irish poet William Butler Yeats once said in a poem about his Ireland entitled Easter Sunday, 1916, he said, "All's changed, changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. No graduating class gets to choose the time into which they graduate. And every time is different. But you're graduating into a world that is rapidly changing, changing utterly. From challenges and missions to changing climates. As I said, this is not your father's Coast Guard. We rely on you, the United States Coast Guard, to see that the world in which we are graduating is beautiful and not simply terrible. All's changed. You graduated in a world where the great powers have stepped back from the brink of mutual assured destruction, but where new stateless actors have stepped into the breach with the desire to smuggle weapons of terror into American ports in the belly of cargo containers to do our people great harm. All's changed. You graduated in a world where the new fault lines between nations are the sea lanes and the straits you know so well. Because more than any other time in history, every nation's economic power and viability is tied to the global economy, and as ever, both dependent on the safe passage of goods on the seas, because 90% of all goods are traded by sea. The container ship is still the backbone of global commerce, and it's your job to secure it. You graduated in a world where piracy and human trafficking have reached levels that no one thought could exist 50 years ago. You graduated in a world where our environmental security, our shorelines, our fisheries, all are threatened by this country's need to drill in deep seas and transport hundreds of billions of gallons of oil on the high seas. You graduated in a world where the consequences of global warming offer the possibility of ice-free passage across Arctic regions that didn't exist when you were born, presenting entirely new challenges that will demand greater international cooperation and so much more. But in every case, you're going to play a pivotal, essential role. And that's why, as officers, you will conduct port security training missions in countries as diverse as Liberia and Saudi Arabia and Indonesia to ensure that U.S. port facilities around the world meet the security standards that containers entering the United States require, being certain that they do not contain destructive elements. That's why, as officers, you will operate Coast Guard icebreakers that allow ships to navigate waters that would otherwise be unpassable, from the Great Lakes in the Northeast to new passages in the Arctic. And that's why today you are preparing for an Arctic future that includes colder, more remote, more complicated operations than routinely have ever been engaged in before by the Coast Guard. And that's why you'll be part of a specialized law enforcement teams to fight maritime crime, including piracy up the Horn of Africa, often working hand in hand with the Navy's Fifth Fleet. And that's why you'll respond to not just natural and man-made disasters, to stop ships from illegally polluting and catch those that do, to help prevent and clean up oil spills, not just to protect our resources, but to help train and partner with other countries to protect theirs as well. Graduating seniors, I'm here to tell you, I am absolutely confident in your ability to meet these new and growing challenges, to protect and secure your country's interests. You are up to every task. In this changing world, it is not an exaggeration to say we're going to increasingly depend upon you. The nation asks a great deal of you because we know you're capable of a great deal. As Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. once said, and I quote, "Greatness is not in where we stand, but in what direction we are moving. We must sail sometimes with the wind and sometimes against it, but sail we must and not drift, nor lie at anchor." None of you intends to lie at anchor. I'm confident that the direction in which we are moving will guarantee your greatness. And much of that confidence lies in knowing that in the class of 2013, you're about to take the helm of a Coast Guard, the greatest Coast Guard in the history of the world. So my wish for you all is may God bless you, and bless the United States of America, and may God protect our men and women in uniform. Congratulations, class of 2013.
On behalf of the Academy, thank you, Mr. Vice President, for your service to this great nation and for being with us here today. I would now like to present the United States Coast Guard Band, conducted by Captain Kenneth Megan, who will perform a medley of service marches. All past and present members of the military are invited to stand as the band plays their respective services anthem. Thank you, Captain Megan and members of the Coast Guard Band. At this time, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Kurt Colella, Dean of Academics, who will present the candidates for degrees.
Mr. Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, or I should say good afternoon at 12:11. Will the candidates for the degree of Bachelor of Science please rise? Rear Admiral Stowes, as Dean of Academics, I have the honor of presenting to you the candidates for the degree of Bachelor of Science. They have been examined and approved by the faculty.
By virtue of the authority vested in me, I now confer upon each of you the degree of Bachelor of Science and admit you to all its rights and privileges. Congratulations. Well done.
Thank you, Admiral.
Cadets, please be seated. I am now pleased to introduce Captain James McCauley, the United States Coast Guard Academy's 34th Commandant of Cadets, who will present the candidates for commissioning as ensigns in the United States Coast Guard.
Mr. Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, members of the class of 2013, good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you, Dean. Admiral Papp, as the Commandant of Cadets, I have the honor of presenting to you the candidates for the commission of ensign in the United States Coast Guard. They have met all military requirements. At this time, I invite you to address the class of 2013 and to administer the oath of office to those being commissioned in the United States Coast Guard.
Thank you, Captain McCauley. And first of all, before I start this privilege of getting a chance to swear the class of 2013 into the Officer Corps, wasn't that a great performance by our Coast Guard Band this morning? I take the opportunity wherever I go to recognize our band, but this morning in particular, I'd like to recognize its director, Captain Ken Megan, who will be retiring this year. This is his last graduation ceremony, I believe. And I want to thank him for his years of service to the Coast Guard, and in particular for leading the nation's best military band. Thank you, Captain Megan. So, class of 2013, I've had the opportunity to speak to you 3 times in January. I know you're always receptive in January, coming back off Christmas leave, getting prepared for the spring semester. So I thought I'd just remind you quickly of the things that I spoke to you about. The first year I came up here in early 2011, I had the privilege of speaking to all of you as third-class cadets, along with the remainder of the Corps, about the significance of the oath that you're about to take. I thought that was probably the most important lesson that I could pass on to the Cadet Corps, because it has such meaning, and it is administered right at the beginning of your career as Coast Guard officers. The second year I came up here, your second class year, I had the opportunity to talk about some of our heroes in our Coast Guard history. And then just this past year, when I came up here, I had a chance to talk to you about proficiency and a disciplined initiative. And having found that the faculty and staff here finds you proficient and disciplined and prepared to become officers in the United States Coast Guard, it's going to be my privilege to administer the oath to you to become ensigns in our Coast Guard. But before that, I had one last lesson that I wanted to pass on to you. It's significant. It complements the message from Cadet Sullivan Springhetti this morning, and it comes from a person who's the same age as you. I met this person, who's now a third-class petty officer, just about 4 years ago. and I was impressed by this individual. I heard him speak when he received an award, so I've stayed in touch with him over the years. And when I met him that first time, I asked him about his background, and he informed me that he was a Canadian citizen who had grown up in Canada and had watched the United States Coast Guard through movies and other news bits and things, and decided to move as a young adult to the United States and enlist in the United States Coast Guard. He wanted to become a rescue swimmer, I think because he watched The Guardian. So I've stayed in touch with him throughout the years. He gained his U.S. citizenship, and he's been serving, went through training, and from time to time I send him an email just to check in and see how he's doing. So I sent him one just a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to share his response with you. He says, "Good morning, Admiral. I'm really glad to hear from you, and I'm glad that's all well with you. As you know, I wanted to be a rescue swimmer, and that didn't work out. So I took a step back, and I looked at what else was there for me. So I chose to become an aviation electronics technician. You see, Admiral, to be honest, it really didn't matter what job I got to do in the Coast Guard. I just wanted to be in the Coast Guard. To me, this wasn't a job, but a lifestyle. I've made some of the best friends in the service, and I always tell people that when I joined, I gained 42,000 brothers and sisters. I'm doing well. I just completed my flight mechanic syllabus here at the air station, and I'm set to transfer in 2014. With all that said, I'm living the dream, Admiral. As you already know, this is by far the best service to be a part of. Thank you for taking the time to ask. Take care, Admiral. I'll be here, standing the watch. Semper Paratus." I read this to you because this is one of those brothers and sisters that Cadet Sullivan Springhetti spoke of earlier this morning. You will be a part of that rather large family that we call Coast Guardsmen. Active duty, reserve, auxiliarists, and civilians. And your job as officers will be to care for that family. You'll be a part of it, but you'll also be responsible for taking care of it. These people will be in your care. I'd like to ask all Chief Petty Officers here today to stand, please. This petty officer that I spoke about is only one of a large group of people that you will have the responsibility of leading. But you've seen examples throughout your Coast Guard time here at the Coast Guard Academy, and in particular, you've seen it in the enlisted leadership that's been here, the chiefs in the barracks. No better example for you than Master Chief Lloyd Pierce, and certainly none better than the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, Mike Levitt. These are the people who you will lead, but they will also be your mentors. So you are surrounded by the Chief's Mess right now, and as you go to your new units, I ask you to reach out to the Chief's Mess, learn from them, lead them, be mentored by them. That will get you off to a good start. And here ends my last lesson to you before you become officers. Thank you, Chiefs. So I know you're all ready, and I'll ask you all to rise, please. And while I've told you that this is a distinct honor for me, and I really look forward to swearing in each class to welcome in my newest officers in our Coast Guard, I'm going to delegate that authority today because there's someone who I think has a special connection with this class, Rear Admiral Cook. He had a chance to introduce himself at your dining in, and I thought since he has a very close connection in Megan Cook in this class, that I'd allow him to swear in this class, of course, under my watchful eye. So Admiral Cook, if you would take care of the honors, please.
Well, if you're ready, class of 2013, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. Having been appointed to the grade of ensign in the United States Coast Guard, I do solemnly swear that I shall support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I shall bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and I shall well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office of which I am about to enter. So help me God. Congratulations, ensigns. Welcome to the Officer Corps.
Ensigns, please be seated. Thank you, Admiral Papp, Admiral Cook. We will now present the graduating class with their diplomas and commissions. As each graduate approaches the platform today, he or she is being presented by a challenge coin by retired Commander James A. Sylvester, President of the United States Coast Guard Academy Alumni Association. The origin of the challenge coin is rooted in military tradition as a symbol of unity and a means of identification. The coins being presented today have the Academy seal on one side and the Class of 2013 crest on the other. The coins are a gift from the Coast Guard Academy Parents Association in memory of all parents lost to members of the Class of 2013 who are not with us today, to honor the graduation of their son or daughter. The degrees of Bachelor of Science will be presented by the Superintendent, Rear Admiral Sandra L. Stowes. Commissions as ensigns in the Coast Guard will be presented by the Vice President. The Commandant of Cadets, Captain James McCauley, will announce the names and the unit to which each new ensign will be assigned. Captain McCauley.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my deep personal honor to name each graduate, their academic honors, and their future assignment. Since its founding in 1876, the United States Coast Guard Academy has graduated leaders of character in service to our nation. Out of respect for each graduate, please hold all sounds of acknowledgement and applause until the last graduate has crossed the stage. At that time, we will give them the thunderous round of applause they so richly deserve. Elena Marie Acumano, graduating with high honors, student engineer, Cutter Resolute, St. Petersburg, Florida. Brian Anthony Acuna, graduating with honors, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. His commission will be presented by his father, First Sergeant Oscar Acuna, U.S. Army retired, and by his brother, Lieutenant Junior Grade Jason Acuna, U.S. Coast Guard. Dante Adams, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Thetis, Key West, Florida. His commission will be presented by his father, Chief Warrant Officer Dion Adams, U.S. Navy, retired. David Allen Adams, Jr., Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Dauntless, Galveston, Texas. His commission will be presented by his father, Captain David Adams, U.S. Navy. Douglas Ezra Anna, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Morgenthau, Honolulu, Hawaii. Keith Glenn Arnold, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Spar, Kodiak, Alaska. His commission will be presented by his father, Senior Chief Petty Officer Kenneth Arnold, U.S. Navy, retired. Ian Jacob Ashner, Student Engineer, Cutter Escanaba, Boston, Massachusetts. His commission will be presented by his brother, Lieutenant Junior Grade Tyler Ashner, U.S. Coast Guard. Tyler Trenton Frank Babkowicz, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Dauntless, Galveston, Texas. William John Baker, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Jefferson Island, South Portland, Maine. Charles Curtis Barrett, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Tampa, Portsmouth, Virginia. His commission will be presented by his brother, Lieutenant Junior Grade John Barrett, U.S. Coast Guard. Holly Janine Basting, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Spencer, Boston, Massachusetts. Parker Lee Bateson, graduating with honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Willow, Newport, Rhode Island. His commission will be presented by his father, Commander Damon Bateson, U.S. Navy, retired, and by his brother, Lieutenant Junior Grade Damon Bateson II, U.S. Navy. Michael Dean Beaupre, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Tahoma, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. His commission will be presented by his father, Master Chief Petty Officer Jeffrey Beaupre, U.S. Coast Guard. Riley Austin Beecher, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Boutwell, San Diego, California. Brandon Russell Belville, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Pea Island, Key West, Florida. Jacob Kenny Bibb, Student Engineer, Cutter Alex Haley, Kodiak, Alaska. Carolyn Michelle Biggis, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Decisive, Pascagoula, Mississippi. Tyler James Bittner, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Bristol Bay, Detroit, Michigan. Madeline Elizabeth Blackburn, Student Engineer, Cutter Northland, Portsmouth, Virginia. Sarah Catherine Blatt, Flight Training, Pensacola, Florida. Joseph Dale Blinksky, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Tampa, Portsmouth, Virginia. Lauren Ella Block, graduating with honors, Prevention, Sector New York, Staten Island, New York. Andrew Michael Bogdan, Flight Training, Pensacola, Florida. Mark Anthony Bonner, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Valiant, Mayport, Florida. Jacob Thomas Barros, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Forward, Portsmouth, Virginia. His commission will be presented by his father, Captain Francis Burroughs, U.S. Coast Guard. Conrad Michael Boucher, Student Engineer, Cutter Morgenthau, Honolulu, Hawaii. His commission will be presented by his father, Major Robert Boucher, U.S. Army, retired. Barrett Jean Boyle, graduating with honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Valiant, Mayport, Florida. Her commission will be presented by her mother, Lieutenant Colonel Carrie St. John, U.S. Army, retired, and by her father, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Boyle, U.S. Army, retired. Andrew Parker Bratman, Student Engineer, Cutter Bear, Portsmouth, Virginia. Connor Duncan Breckenridge, Student Engineer, Cutter Berthoff, Alameda, California. His commission will be presented by his mother, Vice Admiral Jody Breckenridge, U.S. Coast Guard, retired. Stephanie Marie Bugish, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Polar Star, Seattle, Washington. Cameron Tyler Carroll, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Laguerre, Portsmouth, Virginia. Josie Marie Cartaya, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Walnut, Honolulu, Hawaii. Her commission will be presented by her mother, Colonel Christine Cartaya, U.S. Air Force Reserve. Harrison Gilbert Carter, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Campbell, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Christine Case, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Tahoma, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Gina Catherine Kaler, graduating with honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Polar Star, Seattle, Washington. Rachel Leslie Christensen, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Sycamore, Cordova, Alaska. Thomas Stephen Cronert, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Key Biscayne, Key West, Florida. Christopher Lee Clifton, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Robert Yarrett, Miami Beach, Florida. Thomas Robert Cogley, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Oak, Charleston, South Carolina. His commission will be presented by his second cousin, Coast Guard Board of Trustees member, Rear Admiral Stephen Metrick, U.S. Coast Guard. Carly Nicole Collins, graduating with honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Maple, Sitka, Alaska. Her commission will be presented by her uncle, Lieutenant Commander Richard Russell, U.S. Navy, retired. Andrew Joseph Cook, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Mohawk, Key West, Florida. His commission will be presented by his father, Major Joseph Cook, U.S. Army, retired. Megan Emily Cook, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Juniper, Newport, Rhode Island. Her commission will be presented by her father, Rear Admiral Kevin Cook, U.S. Coast Guard. Michael Gillen Cooper, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Mackinac, Sheboygan, Michigan. Nicole Elizabeth Corbett, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Morgenthau, Honolulu, Hawaii. Rachel Irene Cothrell, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Forward, Portsmouth, Virginia. Jedediah Thomas Delyden, graduating with honors, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. His commission will be presented by his brother, Captain Joshua Delyden, U.S. Air Force. Stephen Matthew Danseglio, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Harriet Lane, Portsmouth, Virginia. Bradley James Davis, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Long Island, Valdez, Alaska. James Freeland Diddell, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Morgenthau, Honolulu, Hawaii. Claire Elise Dorsey, graduating with high honors, response, Sector Northern New England, South Portland, Maine. Her commission will be presented by her father, Colonel Charles Dorsey, U.S. Air Force, retired. Justin Lucas Doherty, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Summer Joy Dupler, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Steadfast, Warrenton, Oregon. Madeline Nicole Eade, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Reliance, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Elisa Jean Insignias Garcia, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Weishi, Alameda, California. David Andrew Endine, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Gallatin, Charleston, South Carolina. Brandy Allison Engel, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Charles David, Key West, Florida. Austin Samuel English, graduating with honors, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Carmine Angelo Fall, Jr., student engineer, Cutter Tahoma, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. His commission will be presented by his father, Chief Petty Officer Carmine Fall, Sr., U.S. Navy, retired. Anne Catherine Feskovics, graduating with honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Willow, Newport, Rhode Island. Alexandria Mary Fell, student engineer, Cutter Thetis, Key West, Florida. Her commission will be presented by her mother, Lieutenant Colonel Mary Fell, U.S. Army, retired. James Michael Fennessy, graduating with honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Cypress, Pensacola, Florida. Caitlin Rebecca Force, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Vigorous, Cape May, New Jersey. Her commission will be presented by her father, Lieutenant Colonel William Force, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. Edwin Joshua Forteza, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Escanaba, Boston, Massachusetts. Kelsey Lauren Freeman, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Alex Haley, Kodiak, Alaska. Joshua Allen Freevold, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Liberty, Auk Bay, Alaska. Prescott Trent Fuller, graduating with honors, student engineer, Cutter Polar Star, Seattle, Washington. Edward Richard Gaylor, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Rush, Honolulu, Hawaii. His commission will be presented by his grandfather, Chief Petty Officer Edward Gaylor, U.S. Navy, retired. Nolan Patrick Gallagher, graduating with honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Confidence, Port Canaveral, Florida. Eric Robert Gherkin, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Hollyhock, Port Huron, Michigan. His commission will be presented by his grandfather, Lieutenant Commander Anthony Ziner, U.S. Navy, retired. Kathleen Adrienne Jaguar, graduating with high honors. Response, Sector Charleston, Charleston, South Carolina. John Joseph Giovanni III, graduating with honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Mohawk, Key West, Florida. Maurice Goyne, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Seneca, Boston, Massachusetts. William Marcos Gonzalez, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Northland, Portsmouth, Virginia. His commission will be presented by his father, Sergeant First Class William Gonzalez, U.S. Army, retired. Daniel Raymond Graff, graduating with honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Galveston Island, Honolulu, Hawaii. Corey Selleck Green, student engineer, Cutter Hickory, Homer, Alaska. Frederick Laszlo William Green, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Matinicus, San Juan, Puerto Rico. Colin Rodney Gruen, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Midget, Seattle, Washington. Merrill Gutowski, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Rush, Honolulu, Hawaii. Alex Robert Hamill, graduating with honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Weishi, Alameda, California. Ryan Patrick Harrigan, graduating with honors, Flight Training, Pensacola, Florida. Curtis James Hayes, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Mobile Bay, Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. His commission will be presented by his grandfather, Major General James LeClaire, U.S. Air Force, retired. Benjamin Hinchman V, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Vigilant, Port Canaveral, Florida. Brianna Lynn Height, graduating with honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Paul Clark, Miami, Florida. Freddie Antalon Hofschneider III, graduating with honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Assateague, Apra Harbor, Guam. Sarah Ray Hohenberger, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Boutwell, San Diego, California. Her commission will be presented by her sister, Lieutenant Junior Grade Lauren Hohenberger, U.S. Coast Guard. Natasha Cherise Hope, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Tahoma, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Adam Thomas Horstick, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Laguerre, Portsmouth, Virginia. Andrew John Horvath, graduating with honors, student engineer, Cutter Steadfast, Warrenton, Oregon. Ethan Gregory Hook, graduating with honors, student engineer, Cutter Laguerre, Portsmouth, Virginia. Jared David Ishii, graduating with high honors, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Steele Houston Johnson, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Elm, Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. Daniel Makoto Jones, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Healy, Seattle, Washington. His commission will be presented by his father, Major Charles Jones, U.S. Army, retired. Terry Elizabeth Josa, student engineer, Cutter Spencer, Boston, Massachusetts. Julia Teresa Kane, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Kukui, Honolulu, Hawaii. Kathleen Elizabeth Kane, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Monroe, Kodiak, Alaska. Elizabeth Ferran Kennis, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Laguerre, Portsmouth, Virginia. Gregory Michael Kennerly, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Tybee, Woods Hole, Massachusetts. David Douglas Kent, graduating with honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Steadfast, Warrenton, Oregon. Joseph William Kidwell, student engineer, Cutter Vigorous, Cape May, New Jersey. His commission will be presented by his father, Commander James Kidwell, U.S. Coast Guard, retired. Cameron Elizabeth King, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Alex Haley, Kodiak, Alaska. Ellen Christine Kintz, graduating with high honors, student engineer, Cutter Alert, Warrenton, Oregon. David John Klein, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Block Island, Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. Vincent Michael Knabel, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Sherman, San Diego, California. His commission will be presented by his grandfather, Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Aiken, Jr., U.S. Army, retired. Kevin Michael Knopp, graduating with high honors, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. James Paul Knutson, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Northland, Portsmouth, Virginia. His commission will be presented by his grandfather, Commander Leo Barron, U.S. Navy, retired. Artem Konotopsky, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Kiska, Hilo, Hawaii. Kimberly Marie Kopchak, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Confidence, Port Canaveral, Florida. Victoria Elizabeth Lacefield Rodriguez, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Gallatin, Charleston, South Carolina. Brent Joseph Lane, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Diligence, Wilmington, North Carolina. His commission will be presented by his brother, Lieutenant Matthew Lane, U.S. Coast Guard. Patrick Nichols Levitt, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Vigorous, Cape May, New Jersey. Aaron Michael Lee, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Dependable, Cape May, New Jersey. Brennan Patrick Lee, graduating with honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Resolute, St. Petersburg, Florida. Connor Cashel Lee, graduating with honors, student engineer, Cutter Confidence, Port Canaveral, Florida. His commission will be presented by his father, Major Bradford Lee, Army National Guard, retired. Charles William Leffler, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Monroe, Kodiak, Alaska. Gabrielle Carl Lemley, student engineer, Cutter Gallatin, Charleston, South Carolina. Robert Edward Litz, graduating with high honors, student engineer, Cutter Weishi, Alameda, California. Michael James Lopez, graduating with high honors, response, Sector Puget Sound, Seattle, Washington. His commission will be presented by his brother, Lieutenant Junior Grade Christopher Lopez, U.S. Coast Guard. James Franklin Lord, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Campbell, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. His commission will be presented by his sister, Lieutenant Kathleen Fallon, U.S. Coast Guard. Stephen Richard Logier, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Rush, Honolulu, Hawaii. Matthew Forrest Lynn, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Berthoff, Alameda, California. John Virgil Mack, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Steadfast, Warrenton, Oregon. Justin Patrick Mayo, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Bear, Portsmouth, Virginia. John Richard Manganiello, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Grand Isle, Gloucester, Massachusetts. Gregory Aaron Marshall, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Harriet Lane, Portsmouth, Virginia. Matthew James Martin, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Sherman, San Diego, California. Felipe Martinez, Honduran Navy, Honduras. Carrie-Ann Elizabeth Mason, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Alert, Warrenton, Oregon. Michael David Massaro, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Morgenthau, Honolulu, Hawaii. Karen Margaret Maddock, Student Engineer, Cutter Mackinac, Sheboygan, Michigan. Blake Austin Moorer, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Monroe, Kodiak, Alaska. Colleen Elizabeth McHugh, graduating with honors, Student Engineer, Cutter Venturous, St. Petersburg, Florida. Her commission will be presented by her father, Major James McHugh, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. Patrick Murdoch Meggers, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Campbell, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Stephanie Mavis, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Tampa, Portsmouth, Virginia. Ryan James Miklosevich, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Vigilant, Port Canaveral, Florida. Getty Scott Miller, Student Engineer, Cutter Dauntless, Galveston, Texas. Lydia Grace Helen Monks, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Mohawk, Key West, Florida. Emily Ann Morrow, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Berthoff, Alameda, California. Richard Charles Nagel, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Alert, Warrenton, Oregon. Barton Scott Nanny, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Alder, Duluth, Minnesota. Jacob Risto Nome, graduating with high honors, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Justin Douglas Neese, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Midget, Seattle, Washington. Juliana Valerie Nichar, graduating with honors, Student Engineer, Cutter Decisive, Pascagoula, Mississippi. Her commission will be presented by her sister, Lieutenant Junior Grade Mary Nietrauer, U.S. Coast Guard. Bradley John Nelson, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Harriet Lane, Portsmouth, Virginia. His commission will be presented by his grandfather, Captain Donald Smith, U.S. Navy Reserve. Keith Nicholson, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Key Largo, San Juan, Puerto Rico. Stephen Thomas Nolan, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Polar Star, Seattle, Washington. His commission will be presented by his father, Purple Heart recipient, Command Sergeant Major Kevin Nolan, U.S. Army. Patrick Joseph O'Donnell, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Seneca, Boston, Massachusetts. Eric William Ordson, graduating with high honors, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Michael Scott Packer, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Campbell, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Jonathan Edward Paquette, Student Engineer, Cutter Dependable, Cape May, New Jersey. Casey Eugene Paris, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Midget, Seattle, Washington. Richard Francis Saga Paroka, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Steadfast, Warrenton, Oregon. Colleen Mary Patton, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Sherman, San Diego, California. Daniel Avellino Pereira, graduating with honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Weishi, Alameda, California. Norberto Tomas Perez, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Seneca, Boston, Massachusetts. Derek James Petty, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Stratton, Alameda, California. His commission will be presented by his father, Colonel Chris Petty, Army National Guard. Michael Joseph Piantadosi, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Kodiak Island, Key West, Florida. Alma Marcella Pinello, Belize Coast Guard, Belize. Graham Nash Pitcairn, graduating with high honors, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Nicholas Dieter Poehler, graduating with high honors, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Jeffrey Andrew Pringle, student engineer, Cutter Campbell, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Enrique Lino Quiones, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Gallatin, Charleston, South Carolina. His commission will be presented by his grandfather, Purple Heart recipient, First Sergeant Jorge Quinones, U.S. Army, retired, and by his mother, Master Sergeant Sandra Quinones, U.S. Air Force, retired. Rachel Claire Rand, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Midget, Seattle, Washington. Her commission will be presented by her father, Captain Michael Rand, U.S. Coast Guard, retired. Michael Allen Rauch, graduating with high honor, flight training, Pensacola, Florida. His commission will be presented by his father, Commander Stephen Rauch, U.S. Navy, retired. Andrew Drummond Ray, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Gallatin, Charleston, South Carolina. Hisham Rihuma, Tunisian Navy, Tunisia. Christopher Patrick Reamer, graduating with high honors, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Seneca, Boston, Massachusetts. His commission will be presented by his father, Major Giles Reamer, U.S. Army, retired. Jonathan Robert Resch, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Monroe, Kodiak, Alaska. Eric Nicholas Russell, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Monroe, Kodiak, Alaska. His commission will be presented by his father, Lieutenant Commander David Russell, U.S. Coast Guard, retired, and his brother, Lieutenant Charles Russell, U.S. Coast Guard. Tyler Jones Richardson, graduating with honors, student engineer, Cutter Polar Star, Seattle, Washington. His commission will be presented by his grandfather, Captain Billy Richardson, U.S. Coast Guard, retired. Derek Paul Rocky, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Alder, Duluth, Minnesota. Lydia Francis Rhodes, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Decisive, Pascagoula, Mississippi. Kathleen Antoinette Romas, student engineer, Cutter Sherman, San Diego, California. Her commission will be presented by her father, Master Chief Petty Officer William Romas, U.S. Navy, retired. Andrew Joseph Russo III, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Valiant, Mayport, Florida. Rachel Lynn Richtanic, Flight Training, Pensacola, Florida. Jonathan Joseph Salinas, graduating with honors, student engineer, Cutter Forward, Portsmouth, Virginia. His commission will be presented by his brother, Lieutenant Junior Grade Christopher Salinas, U.S. Coast Guard. Corey Francis Sanchez, graduating with high honors, Flight Training, Pensacola, Florida. Ian Douglas William Sankey, graduating with high honors, student engineer, Cutter Healy, Seattle, Washington. Jonathan Scott Sapunjeff, graduating with honors, student engineer, Cutter Diligence, Wilmington, North Carolina. Nerijus Sharkosas, Lithuanian Navy, Lithuania. Stacia Kaylee Sarwinski, graduating with high honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Venturous, St. Petersburg, Florida. Carl William Schemmel, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Mohawk, Key West, Florida. Catherine Mary Schmitz, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Richard Etheridge, Miami Beach, Florida. Her commission will be presented by her brother, Lieutenant Paul Schmitz, U.S. Coast Guard. John Martin Schultz, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Stratton, Alameda, California. Colin O'Neill Schuster, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Mellon, Seattle, Washington. Edward William Sella, graduating with high honors. Flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Luca Slezak Serdar, graduating with honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Mellon, Seattle, Washington. Maxim Sivohins, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Mellon, Seattle, Washington. Jeb Stewart Slick, graduating with high honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Nantucket, St. Petersburg, Florida. Kevin Paul Smith, graduating with honors. Flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Joseph Lars Taft Smith, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Diligence, Wilmington, North Carolina. Lee Gardner Sowers, graduating with high honors. Student Engineer, Cutter Mohawk, Key West, Florida. Daniel Christian Spangler, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Boutwell, San Diego, California. His commission will be presented by his father, Chief Petty Officer Keith Spangler, U.S. Coast Guard, retired. Zachary James Speck, graduating with honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Bainbridge Island, Highlands, New Jersey. Ronald Todd Stevens, Jr., Student Engineer, Cutter Gallatin, Charleston, South Carolina. His commission will be presented by his father, Colonel Ronald Stevens, U.S. Army. Connor Andrew Stevens, Student Engineer, Cutter Boutwell, San Diego, California. Kellen Alexander Stock, graduating with honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Roanoke Island, Homer, Alaska. Timothy Charles Storbeck, Jr., Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Rush, Honolulu, Hawaii. Joseph Neil Sullivan Springhetti, graduating with high honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Venturous, St. Petersburg, Florida. Joshua Richard Surgeon, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Sherman, San Diego, California. Colin Topier Sykes, graduating with honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Fur, Astoria, Oregon. Erin Marie Talbot, graduating with high honors. Prevention, Sector New Orleans, Louisiana. Brandon Matthew Taylor, graduating with high honors. Student engineer, Cutter-Waishi, Alameda, California. Vanessa Renee Taylor, student engineer, Cutter Active, Port Angeles, Washington. George Armstrong Thomas IV, graduating with honors. Student engineer, Cutter Mellon, Seattle, Washington. Carl Albert Thurston, graduating with high honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Vigilant, Port Canaveral, Florida. Nathaniel Hanson Toll, graduating with honors. Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Sanibel, Woods Hole, Massachusetts. Caroline Ann Truesdell, student engineer, Cutter Midget, Seattle, Washington. Nathan Custis Turner, graduating with honors. Prevention, Marine Safety Unit, Port Arthur, Texas. Ryan James Vandehei, graduating with honors. Flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Jessica Erin Van Horn, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Bernard Weber, Miami, Florida. Tyler Jordan Vieira, student engineer, Cutter Reliance, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. His commission will be presented by his father, Commander Michael Vieira, U.S. Navy, retired. Joshua Stephen Villafane, student engineer, Cutter Boutwell, San Diego, California. Caleb Wayne Wadsworth, graduating with honors. Flight training, Pensacola, Florida. Catherine Marie Walker, graduating with honors. Prevention, Sector San Francisco, California. Her commission will be presented by her father, Lieutenant Colonel John Walker, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. Maxwell Edward Walker, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Nashon, Ketchikan, Alaska. Rita Victoria Walter, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Aspen, San Francisco, California. Alexa Corinne Ward, student engineer, Cutter Rush, Honolulu, Hawaii. Jessica Teresa Ward, graduating with high honors. Prevention, Sector Puget Sound, Seattle, Washington. Her commission will be presented by her father, Colonel Stephen Ward, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. Thomas James Warren, student engineer, Cutter Stratton, Alameda, California. His commission will be presented by his brother, Lieutenant Junior Grade Theodore Warren, U.S. Coast Guard. Catherine Margaret Weber, graduating with high honors. Response, Sector Jacksonville, Atlantic Beach, Florida. Her commission will be presented by her brother, Second Lieutenant Mark Weber, U.S. Air Force. Joel Bird Weiss, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Northland, Portsmouth, Virginia. Benjamin Stephen Williams, Student Engineer, Cutter Harriet Lane, Portsmouth, Virginia. His commission will be presented by his father, Colonel Jeffrey Jarventsevu, U.S. Army Reserve. Kevin Michael Wisner, Student Engineer, Cutter Valiant, Mayport, Florida. His commission will be presented by his brother, Purple Heart recipient, Staff Sergeant Nicholas Wisner, U.S. Army Reserve. Garrett Wilcher Wright, Student Engineer, Cutter Monroe, Kodiak, Alaska. Timothy Leonard Widerko, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Dependable, Cape May, New Jersey. Tani Ellen Zaccano, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Healy, Seattle, Washington. Andrew Ethan Zitzman, Deck Watch Officer, Cutter Mellon, Seattle, Washington. His commission will be presented by his brother, Lieutenant Luke Zitzman, U.S. Coast Guard, and his sister, Second Lieutenant Elena Zitzman, U.S. Army. Ladies and gentlemen, the graduates of 2013, please join me in a resounding round of applause.
You can all sit. Mr. Vice President, I invite you to join Ensign Brennan Lee, the President of the Class of 2013, to the right of the podium. Ensign Lee has the honor of presenting you with the Class of 2013 gift as a symbol that reflects the class' strength, courage, and devotion to the service of their country. Will the audience please stand for the alma mater and remain standing for the benediction? Commander Keith Shuley, Chaplain Corps, United States Navy, will now deliver the benediction.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we ask you to send your Spirit upon our graduates, our newest ensigns, and we ask that you bless them as they go forth as officers, commissioned to protect our borders and all the American people. As they stand before us now, surrounded by family and friends and loved ones and relatives and benefactors, help them to realize the hard work and the sacrifices they made will benefit themselves and everyone they encounter. As they move on to the next chapter of their lives, help them meet the challenges and respond to the adventures that lie ahead, always in the context of our core values: honor, respect, and devotion to duty. These that they learned in a real and true way during the past 4 years. Help them to use these tools to make wise decisions, to ensure the safety of their shipmates, and to care for all they seek to help and serve. Lord, as our Coast Guard officers go forth to face dangers and threats in our troubled world today, watch over them always. Let them be a sign of hope to others in times of fear and disaster. And in a special way today, we lift up all the people of the state of Oklahoma and all those involved in the relief efforts. May these new officers see in themselves peacekeepers, protectors of freedom, bringing stability and order to a grateful nation. In your name we pray. Amen.
Ensigns of the class of 2013, you may now divest yourselves of all symbols of cadet life. Platform party, recover. New ensigns and the Corps of Cadets, attend hut. Will the audience please remain in place until the departure of the official party, the playing of Stars and Stripes Forever, and the recessional. Thank you.
The 132nd commencement exercises of the United States Coast Guard Academy are now concluded.